Turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you're going to spend the next hour or so of your life with me, whether it's live, where the show goes out at 9 p.m. Central every Tuesday on Facebook and X, and of course YouTube, or whether you're watching it on one of those sites where it's archived after the fact, or listening on one of the many podcast platforms that the show always goes out on the following Wednesday, and it is, of course, archived there as well. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. We've had a heck of a storm up here in the Northwoods today, and I've heard there are people even down south who've lost their power. And so wherever you are, I hope you're warm and dry, and I hope that you have some heating and some power and that everything's okay in your neck of the woods. Thankfully, we didn't lose power here, which is always a serious concern, and internet and the like when trees come down where I live and take out, power lines and phone lines and other things. I'm delighted that my guest who's joining me today, I don't think he was hit too bad with the storms because he can be here with me, which I'm super grateful for. It's always an amazing night when I get to have him on the show. He's an author, an illustrator, and biblical paranormal researcher. He lives in Waxahachie, Texas. I wonder if I pronounced it right this time. I always get his town wrong. With his children and beautiful, long-suffering wife. Beyond his lifelong love of art and comics, his life has been consumed with the study of archaeology, cryptozoology, ufology, and astronomy in order to better understand the Bible, its teachings, and the one behind its creation, which is going to work out well tonight because we're going to be talking about, or posing the question to him at least, is there things like Bigfoot and UFOs and other, what we would consider, I suppose, modern anomalous phenomena in the Bible? So he's going to fill us in on all of that. And I'm absolutely just delighted to welcome him back. My very good friend, and who was once the co-host with me on the old Mysterious Library show, Mr. Jason McLean.
That is the closest you've ever gotten to pronouncing Waxahachie correctly.
Well, what do I normally say? Like Waxahachie,
Yeah, it's
Waxahachie?
something completely different. Although you did misspell or mispronounce consume, it's consumed. There's that good Australian accent kicking in
There
there.
you go. There you go. Well, people are happy to see that you're here with us tonight. I know I'm
Cool.
excited. I still miss our old Mysterious Library show because, of course, we used to do it at this
this time.
time on a Tuesday night. It was not 9 p.m. and then I moved Talking Weird to that time slot so I could keep that slot.
Yeah, it's a solid slot. We did get hit with the storms, but it wasn't too bad. Although my shed got blown open, and so yeah, that's how I spent my Sunday, was cleaning out all the stuff that got destroyed and damaged in the shed. But other than that, we were fine. But yeah, there's a lot of people who were hit really really hard, and hope good, hoping the best for everybody.
Well, no, as am I. And I think tonight's going to be an interesting show for all of those who are tuning in. But maybe before we roll into it, do you want to let us know what you've been up to?
Yeah. So finally, I got serial papers. I got them back up operational. When I brought back Siru, the plan had been to have the website up and running, and it's ugly, but at least it's there. And it's just a way to, you can follow me on X and Rumble or YouTube, but sirupapers.com, SIRU papers.com, real easy. Links to everything, and my author's page as well if you want to look at some of the books I've come out with. I will have some more stuff coming out here shortly. By the end of June, end of July at the latest, I'll have my first light novel done. It's an anthology. A light novel they're basically short little novelettes that are highly illustrated. So think pulps. I think you're familiar with the pulp thing. And then I've got a comic that I'm working on. And of course, Choopy Rules. If you follow me on Facebook or my both either my personal account or my artist account, you'll see that's coming along. That's sort of an homage to a lot of the old outsider art comics that you get with like car mags and stuff like that. So it's done a very particular way, but I will be working on a more elevated artistic style, a comic involving the harrowing of hell. So lot of stuff coming up. And again, every Sunday, the last Sunday of every month is when I will be releasing a new Siru Papers episode, something just to kind of cover a lot of different topics, going a lot of different places.
Man, it's so good to see Siru back up, and your Chippy Rules comic books are so hilarious as well. I always loves to see panels of that pop up on Facebook.
I appreciate that. Unfortunately, so what I did was I kind of did a lot of the one-page gags first. And so now I'm left with doing these multi-page gags. So it's like so it takes a couple of weeks because I can only work on it. I sort of reward myself by working on Choopy Rules. So it's very much whenever I have an opportunity to do it. But I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's sort of an homage to the car mag comics. So it's very toned down as far as technique, right? It's I'm using mostly just pen and ink, but like Sharpies, right? Trying to again do it manually, actually using marker for it instead of doing a lot of more advanced and sophisticated work. But it's a lot of fun to do, and just we're coming into what may be my favorite little part where I have, it's probably the longest single section of the book, will be this homage to Heinlein, my favorite sci-fi writer.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, I'm going hard on the Heinlein bit. It's hilarious. I love it. I don't care if anybody likes it at all. I get to do Heinlein stuff for like 5 or 6 pages, and I call myself out on it. So I'm having fun with it. But yeah, there's gonna be a lot more art stuff from me over the next coming months, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Well, as long as you enjoy it, mate, I think that's the importance of anything creative. If one can enjoy it when they're creating the art, whether it's comic or whether it's film or whether it's writing or whatever it is, it shines through that the creators enjoyed it and they're not, they're not forcing themselves. Sometimes I guess we all have to force ourselves too, but when it's something we
Yeah.
love, it makes, I think, for a better final result, something that everybody else will enjoy more as well.
I couldn't agree more. 100%.
So let's jump into tonight's discussion, I guess.
Yeah.
Bigfoot in the Bible, are there passages or are there references or is there anything in the Bible that suggests that some type of, I guess, man ape or relict hominid type creature in the Bible? Or what's the biblical or the biblical position on Sasquatch, I guess?
Yeah.
You can go wherever you want to with it.
Well, the only real answer to that is maybe. And here's what I mean by that. We kind of have to define terms, right? Because if we mean, just saw Horse's comment, maybe that's actually not a bad idea. But if we define Bigfoot as the relic hominid, right, which we've discussed, there is nothing specifically that would indicate Bigfoot being called out. There is, I've talked to those that I respect, who have put forward there's this scene in Job where it's just sort of a throwaway line in a lot of ways, where it talks about the sons of fools who live in dry riverbeds and bray like donkeys and eat the mallow plants. I've heard people make the claim that could be an allusion to a Bigfoot-like creature. It's weak sauced for me. Honestly, I think that's trying too hard, given the surrounding verses. So if we are referring to a relic hominid or a an ape that, just a very large bipedal ape, then no, not specifically in the same way it doesn't mention whales or kangaroos or koalas or dingoes or anything from Australia. Went from your hometown, to make you feel at home in that. However, if we define the Bigfoot phenomena a little differently, and for those who are common here, they've seen me and they've heard our interactions for a long time. They know where I'm going with this, but for those who may be new, Dean and I have talked about this for a long time, that there seems to be the word Bigfoot is being used to describe two very different phenomena. One, possibly, and this is where Dean and I kind of separate, that there is a biological entity or entities, a small population walking around of bipedal primates, and even bipedal being in quotation marks. But the one thing we do agree on is there is a paranormal phenomena that is very clearly being called Bigfoot and people are interacting with. That is very much in the Bible. And I think this is where a lot of people want there to be hard and fast rules, and there really aren't. There is the wild man myth, mythos is the wrong way to look at it. The wild man motif exists in every culture around the world, right? And we see that this idea of the hairy ones, the shahadim, in the Old Testament, where they're often referred to as goat demons. They're the hairy ones. There's this association with the goat, and these sort of wilderness places where there is no humans. There is this concept and this view, and we see it very much in Leviticus. It talks about how the Hebrews were to stop making these sacrifices of these goats to these. They even call them goat demons, the shahadim. So there's this concept of sort of this this nature spirit that people were interacting with and probably always have interacted with. In that regard, I would suggest that if we look at the Bigfoot phenomenon in its totality and realize we're not talking about just the one thing, there's a broad spectrum of things, then I think you can make the argument that he is in the Bible, because there is this constant push and pull of humans interacting with paranormal, supernatural entities that perhaps we're not really supposed to. We're supposed to leave them alone. We're not supposed to be interacting with them in the same way. And yet we do. And it gets us into trouble. And we seem to see these hairy things. And and so in that regard, that is very much of scripture, and it's a very common trope and theme that manifests itself throughout human history in every culture. These spirits of the wilderness, where humans aren't, right? When we're not, the places where we don't habitate, these things are. And often they're associated with bad things, calamity, right? You have the fauns and the satyrs of the Greeks. They you were to very much avoid them. We see this in a lot of Asian cultures as well. And yeah, even here in the Americas, it's very common to have these wilderness spirits that are connected to trickster spirits. They're connected to the untamed and the wild. And very much that is a theme that we see in a lot of these more metaphysical, paranormal, supernatural Bigfoot encounters. Absolutely.
Is or does, more to the point, Bigfoot have anything to do with what people refer to as the Nephilim? I know I've seen that idea
Yeah.
thrown about sometimes within
Mhm.
the Bigfoot community, or within the more woo, I suppose, side of the Bigfoot community.
So that, of course, we have sort of the other connection to Esau, but we'll start with the Nephilim. So, in the regards of these, of maybe the forest spirits, I think you can make the argument there's a connection there, because again, uh, demons from the biblical worldview are not fallen angels. That's a different class. Uh, and we see this it spelled out more specifically in the book of Enoch, as far as the Second Temple um, period writings. But we do see allusions to it in the Old Testament about the shades coming, and the connection of the Gibborim to these shades that are dead. Um, what the book of Enoch spells out very specifically is that a Nephilim, when they die, they become these disembodied spirits. Uh, Specifically the Nephilim that were doing bad things. Essentially, they don't have to go into the land of the dead. They can sort of interact with us. These are the spirits that tend to possess people that we see Jesus casting out in the New Testament. And so if there is a lot of connection with people when they start doing, which again, by the way, do not interact with these things at all. This is my one caveat I put on. There's a lot of people running around doing things where they, essentially they're trying to communicate with these spirits. Please don't do that. That's a bad idea. Think of it as the supernatural equivalent of a white panel van with free candy sprawled on it, right? If it said tacos, I'm done, right? There's just no saving me. But if it says free candy, I've got a little bit of resistance. But it's the supernatural equivalent of it. Please don't interact with these things. That's not what it doesn't work out well. That having been said, it is there are plenty of people who have done these things where it's very clear what they're interacting with is a Nephilim, a spirit of a deceased Nephilim. Let me rephrase it that way. So in that regard, for the paranormal aspect of it, I do think there is at least a percentage of these encounters that are Nephilim related. Perhaps not all of them, because there's other, as we've discussed, it's an ecosystem, right? Josh Cutchin's work, it's an ecosystem of supernatural entities. And a big slice of that pie are these Nephilim spirits that I think people are interacting with, and it's presenting itself as a Bigfoot, or perhaps even a Dogman, or whatever it is that you're looking for. It seems to be happy to take that form.
Right, and you mentioned, which was another question I was going to ask you, about the Esau potentially having something to do with the Bigfoot phenomenon. I know sometimes he gets brought up as well by people in this space. You talk a little bit about that, or
Yeah. So just to wrap up the whole Nephilim thing.
sure.
Again, supernatural. Yeah. Going back to the idea of a biological Bigfoot running around, I don't see any connection, because they're always connected to. They're described as humans, just straight up. right? And we've had these other conversations that not every Nephilim is a giant, but there was clearly a class that were very different. They were actually more human-sized. But the simple fact of the matter is, I would not connect any Nephilim to the physical Bigfoot, the large, hairy, bipedal hominid. I wouldn't connect him at all. There's the descriptions we have don't seem to fit with them. Now, like I said, supernatural is a different case. As for Esau, one of the reasons a lot of people connect is that Esau is hairy. Like, he's really hairy. Uh, most famously, the reason a lot of people have sort of pushed in that direction is when Isaac and Esau are sort of they're sort of at war, right? In the idea of who gets the birthright. It was supposed to go to I'm sorry, Ishmael. No, that's not Ishmael. Sorry. My dyslexia is kicking in. Esau. No, yeah, Isaac. No, Isaac's his father. Jacob and Esau. Jiminy cricket. I knew I'd get there. So, Jacob, Isaac's the father. Isaac is supposed to give the birthright to Jacob. That is what God's sort of decreed. But Isaac really likes Esau. There's this scene where Esau sells his birthright to Jacob. It's a very screwed up family. But there's this scene where Isaac is tricked by Jacob. There we go. By putting goat skin, these sort of bracelets and like a thing around his neck of this hairy goat, these sort of shaggy goat skins on him. His mother does this so she can go in and trick Isaac because he's blind now, and then he gives it to Jacob, and then Jacob, his mother's like, you got to get out of Dodge because Esau's going to kill you. So a lot of people have taken this and said, man, that's a really hairy dude. So a lot of people tried to make that connection and say, well, maybe that's what we're seeing with Bigfoot, is that they are these descendants of Esau that have separated from humanity and to live this life. Again, the morphological differences of Bigfoot, particularly with the foot, right, with the footprints that we see, Bigfoot is very superficially humanoid. When you take a very close look to the proportions, the mid-tarsal break with the footprints, it's very much not a human really at all. And Esau's, again, Robin Williams was really hairy too, right? Like, this is one of those things people forget. There have always been very hairy people. And I think what's a big driving force is this idea of trying. We want to connect the thing that we're interested in into our religious worldview, right? And so I think there's a drive to try and find those connections where they don't need to exist. Again, like I mentioned, the Bible doesn't say anything about kangaroos. Doesn't mean kangaroos don't exist, right? Doesn't mean pandas don't exist. Doesn't mean elk don't exist. Parrots. That's not what it's about. And unfortunately, as people have tried, and I'm not saying that they were being deceptively. It's just it is a very human endeavor to try and find a connection where none need to exist.
I think that probably applies to, I've only read a couple times, but the attempt to try to say Nebuchadnezzar being turned into a beast of the field might have something to do with Bigfoot lore as well.
There's been a claim, and again, a connection to that. Usually, though, people try and make a connection to lycanthropy, but it doesn't say that he actually transforms. In so much he just loses his mind, and he can't be restrained, and so his nails grow, his hair grows. It's not that he physically changes. He's just someone who's lost his mind, and the normal grooming things kind of go away. And then once he comes back to his mind and he comes back to himself, that's resolved. Again, it goes back to trying to maybe find it's trying to find a connection where that's not really the point of what the Bible's trying to get across with a lot of this stuff, right? It's very easy to kind of get lost in trying to make it say what we want instead of realizing it's the scripture is a mirror for us. And the only way we can allow it to be a mirror is when we allow it to say what it actually says.
It's all fascinating, Jason. I'm so glad I got you on to talk about this tonight. What about, let's transition a little bit to UFOs, because I know that's something that obviously underpins a lot of ancient astronaut or ancient alien theory, the idea that strange lights and things seen in the heaven or in religious visions within the Bible or in, prophetic type visionary experiences are indicative of perhaps contact with our ancestors having with extraterrestrials or with flying saucers, and them just mistaking aliens for God or for angels. An example, I suppose, and maybe this is something you can elaborate on a little bit, would be the story of Ezekiel's wheel.
Yeah, I'll actually be doing a video on that in the near-ish future, maybe a couple months from now, more specifically. But the story of Ezekiel's wheel is a big favorite because it's very easy, if you don't actually read the text, to sort of connect it to UFOs, and many ancient astronaut theoreticians have tried. The problem is, in order to make that connection, you kind of have to omit like 60% of the text, right? So what we're talking about is Ezekiel chapter 1. God, he has this he and other people, by the way, it's not just him, it's other people have this encounter, but no one else sees what Ezekiel sees. There's this storm, this there's an argument to be made that it's literally like a tornado that gets kicked up, but it's a wind. There's loud noises and lightnings and things like that, and people see that, but they don't see the vision that that Ezekiel himself has. Ezekiel then spends the rest of chapter 1 describing what he's seeing, and literally the things that ancient astronaut theoreticians point to is like 3 sentences out of an entire chapter that's literally dedicated to describing what he's seeing. And so when you see a lot of these, a lot of renderings, they'll maybe have God in a chair, but then you'll have angels off to the side, and then you'll have these weird looking multi-ring things filled with eyes. Sometimes the eyes will have wings. And what a lot of these sort of ancient astronaut, I don't want to call them ufologists, but a lot of the ancient astronaut theorists will do is they'll clip, and they're like, well, maybe these are helicopter blades, and this is actually a domed canopy for the UFO, things like that, right? If you read it and you understand, though, that it's very clearly not what's happening. He is seeing a picture of God enthroned above the firmament sorry, flat earthers, in Hebraic cosmology, there is that's very much what you'll see a lot of art looking like. So essentially what you see is God on his throne. He's sitting above the firmament that separates earth from the realm of the supernatural. There are 4 angels, and what we lose in translation, because we don't live in this culture, is this idea that very much permeated the ancient world, which is that the god, or the god of a particular Arab, usually Marduk, because you're dealing with Babylon, had a throne that had wheels on it, that literally had chariot wheels on it, and it's a ring, and literally a chariot wheel, which again, you have to remember, this is Ezekiel, this is high Bronze Age, very early Iron Age. The most advanced technology for chariots was a wheel within a wheel, right? So you had the wheel that went on the ground, then you had the spokes, and then there was a secondary wheel that supported those spokes, right? So that's literally what he's describing, is that in each angel, which in the cherubim, each one is a specific constellation, right? Literally the 4 corners. That's what it's describing, is God sitting on his throne that has these wheels, because it's symbolic of God seeing everything. The 4 cherubim are literally the 4 cardinal constellations: Taurus, Libra, all that. And it's in order to make it look like it's a UFO, you have to omit about 60% of the chapter, right? And it's one of those things where if you pick and choose, you can kind of make it say what you want it to say. But that's the problem. When you read it in context, it's just not what they're describing, right? And so what you have is, we see this a lot with ancient astronaut theoreticians, is they'll take a section of scripture and say, well, this part I can kind of make it sound like my part, right? Like I can make this sound. Another one is the visitation at Sinai, right? I think this was literally the passage that had, not such an, I can see his face. Yeah, Von Daniken, thank you. This was literally the section that Von Daniken points to as being the thing that made him really question everything, which is at the visitation at Sinai, right? It talks about how God comes down on Mount Sinai, and there's smoke and fire and thunderings. And he's like, well, this sounds like a Titan rocket, right? And yeah, kind of. The problem is, and again, I have no problem with Von Daniken. I do believe he is a true seeker, right? His just the priest that he was, that he was at, I think it was a boarding school he was at. His priest needed to have done a better job of explaining this. If you just take that in its, you just isolate that text, right? Where it's fire and smoke and thunder and lightning, it does sound like an ancient person trying to describe a chemical rocket, right? Absolutely. The problem is you have to omit kind of a lot of other information about it. Like, this is landing on top of a mountain. Again, not a really tall mountain, but I mean, a tallish mountain, but not like very, very tall. So there's not a lot of room for it to land. 2, it's doing this for over 40 days, really much longer than that, but at least because Moses is up there for 40 days and 40 nights. So you're telling me this thing's hovering using that, like that's a hard, and of course it's always, well, it's alien technology. Well, pick one. Either it's alien technology or it's a chemical rocket. If it's a chemical rocket, hovering is the most fuel intensive thing you can do, right? And that's, you start, and of course it's like, well, hold on, doesn't Moses walk up Mount Sinai into the smoke, why didn't he get blown down doing a bad impression of the Human Torch, right? If that's your claim, this is a chemical rocket that's using chemical thrust, burning, pushing down like a Titan rocket. I'm sorry, you're omitting way too much, and you're hand waving it away. And the worst part is, and this both works for Ezekiel and the visitation at Sinai, the level of technology that ancient astronaut theoreticians have put forward to make that connection is the wrong level of technology. If you can get here from anywhere else in the universe, you would not be using a chemical rocket to land, and you sure as the world wouldn't be using a helicopter, right? You would be so far beyond that level of technology. It's the wrong level of technology. And so again, the problem with the UFOs in the Bible is that it appeals to the wrong level of technology, and it's really cherry-picked, heavily cherry-picked, in a way that it's, like I said, I think Von Daniken is a true seeker, but I do think he allowed his desire to believe lead him astray instead of asking some really hard questions. You have famously said, and I think it's a quote from, is it probably Keel, that belief is the enemy.
That's correct. That is a Keelian quote.
Yeah. This is one of those things where the problem with belief, and this is a finger I point at myself a lot, right? Are we allowing our beliefs to override the logic of what we're dealing with? Are we throwing things out, data out, because we don't like it? And if you do, then you're no longer asking, that's no longer science. You're no longer asking the right questions. You're now just trying to prop up your own dogma. And unfortunately, that is something that has gone on for a very long time. And the problem is, for every Von Daniken, there are other people, I will leave nameless, who are charlatans and conmen who very much like to make money off of these ideas, right? And every so often they run across someone like a Wes Huff, and that's just a lot of fun. But the simple fact of the matter is, these are really big concepts. That is being given short shrift to appeal to the most sensationalist view. And I would suggest that this is not to say that the phenomena that we're seeing with UFOs and with abductions today doesn't tie into the Bible. I would suggest very much that it does, just not in the way that an ancient astronaut theoretician would want it to.
We have a couple of questions for you, but before I launch into those, I'd like to thank Jay Katz and his wonderful wife Aspasia, who are in the chat tonight. They run another show on this network called Down South Anomalies, which I listen to regularly. I mean, I love all the shows on the network, but to be honest, the one I listen to most is Down South Anomalies. And they did a wonderful show a couple weeks ago with the Australian wonderful journalist Ross Coulthart, who is now on News Nation here in the US, and he focuses on the UFO mystery, and he's probably one of the key mainstream, perhaps the key mainstream reporter these days looking into it, certainly in the top 3 or 4. So that interview was a real coup for the Untold Radio Network, because Coulthart's a big deal. So if people, particularly because we're talking about UFOs now, so I'm assuming some of our audience would be interested in that interview. So if you are, just go into the Untold Radio archives and look at Down South Anomalies. You can see it on YouTube or on untoldradiom.com, and just go back a couple episodes and you'll see that Ross Coulthart interview on Down South Anomalies. It is excellent. So some questions for you. A very good friend of the show and a good friend of both yours and mine are Professor Emeritus Horace Smith, who is Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University, asks, should we interpret some Old Testament text in light of the astronomical ideas of the ancient Middle East? Great question, Jason.
100%. And a great example of that is literally in Ezekiel, what we were talking about, right? The 4 cherubim, and again, a little extra cultural context. The cherubim were known not just to the Hebrews, but to basically everyone, right? A lot of what happens in the Old Testament is utilizing concepts that was understood by the broader community. But they were called the pillars of the sky. And when you look at what and how they're described, right? Man, bull, eagle, and lion. That's Leo, that's Taurus, that's Aquarius, and then I just forgot which one the eagle is. It's different from we create our constellations more after the Greek interpretation, but it's the same. They're the sidereal constellations. I forget off the top of my head which one's the eagle, but yeah, those are the cherubim are very tightly connected to astronomy. Specifically the sidereal constellations. And what we have to remember is a lot of, again, the Hebraic and again, the entire ancient world, they didn't separate their physical cosmology from their theological cosmology the way we do, right? We have, we can go into space. We have telescopes. We had to separate our theological and physical cosmologies. They didn't do that. So for them, the stars it wasn't so, and particularly in Hebrew thought, this is where it gets a little different. They knew they weren't necessarily per se divine, but they were that touch point where it's like, look up. This is where, that's above us. We can't reach there. It was their way of talking about the divine. And this is why we see even a lot of connections to birds. Like, why does the Holy Spirit descend on Jesus like a dove in the New Testament? It's because in Hebrew thought, where do birds fly? In the sky, right? So that made them closer connected to God. Mountains, the high point, that is where heaven and earth would touch, right? That's very ancient cosmology. So when they were looking up, they were utilizing a lot of astronomical language, not just for their calendars, for determining when things and certain feasts, but as a way of exploring higher theological concepts. Absolutely.
That was an excellent response. Thanks, mate. We have a question from the
Mhm.
Dead End Collective, and he kind of follows it up with a comment, which I'll add as well before we
Sure.
answer the question. He says, "A question: We in antiquity had to show what we could of what we worshipped. So what we did was surround a humanoid with what we actually saw." And he said eclipses, meteor showers, a few close calls with asteroids, combine that with predatory animals, and we have pretty much the Egyptian experience, which I assume he means the Egyptian kind of,
Yeah.
um, mythology, or the Egyptian,
Mhm.
pa- pantheon of gods. So
Yeah.
do you think that explains some of this as well? Or?
So actually, that's a really great observation for the surrounding cultures. And what we see is the entire experience in narrative of the Hebrew scriptures is a pushback against that idea, right? Um, w- if and I know we've talked about Heiser for a long time on this on our shows and the shows we've done together.
Yep.
Michael Heiser points to the divine council. So it's a huge topic. We couldn't even begin to touch the tip of the iceberg on this. But a good way to look at it is that the Hebrew response is saying, "Hey, there is a true creator God, right? And that there are other lesser gods. These are angels is the wrong term. Again, we've lamented the lack of more sophisticated supernatural language in the Western culture, but there are spirits over these nations. And what people were doing was worshiping them by doing exactly what is described, right? There is uh they were they were taking the natural world and essentially using that to describe what they were doing. There's this constant tension in the Hebraic culture and scriptures of the Israelites trying to do that, and God's like, "No, you're not. I'm not something that I am beyond this. This is not what I am. I am not these things. I am above. I am not a created thing." That's why they couldn't make icons of God. It was rejected, was because it was seen as an attempt both to negotiate with the spiritual beings and then also to sort of make them owe you something, right? And I think there's also a lot of modern reading into what we want the ancient cultures to have thought, rather than just saying, well, what did they actually think about these things? The reasons they created temples and idols was as a way of saying, it was a way of taking the divine and bringing it to them, and then now you're negotiating as an equal. And that was something that the God of the Hebrews was not about to do. Jehovah was not, Yahweh, whichever one you want to go with, um, was saying, no, you can't tame me. I am untamable. I created the universe to be with you. That's literally the point of Genesis 1 is God resting, because that's where God's rest would be, in a temple. He's like, I created the universe to be with you. You don't, I have to condescend to you. You don't get to bring me to you, right? I cannot be tamed. So the observation is true for the surrounding cultures, but we see that tension in the Hebrew scriptures where that's not what they wanted to have happen.
What about moving into the New Testament, moving into the birth of Christ and the divinity of Christ, and some attempts, which I've certainly read over the years, of
Mhm.
people to reimagine that virgin birth as having something to do with perhaps alien abduction or alien
Mhm.
impregnation, and then carrying that through to the idea of the Star of Bethlehem leading the wise men, and the angels heralding the birth of Jesus, and all of these things somehow of all
Mhm.
fitting into an extraterrestrial pattern of visitation and of UFOs in the sky, and
Right.
ET messengers and all of this. I mean, I'm sure you've run across those type of interpretations
Oh, yeah.
as well.
Yeah. And again, a lot of this goes back to sort of the push and pull of the modern world trying to reinvent and make texts say what we want them to say, and not what it's actually saying. uh there's a hubris. Allow me to, I'm going to come back to this, but let me to the question, but let me circle around with this. We've talked about this before on this actually on this show. um Donnie Cho says stuff. This is, he's a Buddhist. One of the things we've talked about is the word tulpa has been completely usurped by the Western paranormal, group and understanding. And what we've made it mean is a thought form. However, in Zen Buddhism, which is where the word comes from, or Tibetan Buddhism, specifically, it's an avatar. It is a person has sort of, again, has created this sort of astral projection avatar, and that's what a tulpa is. What we do, and this is what we have done in the modern world, is we've taken the word. We said, well, here's this word that comes from Tibetan Buddhism, and we're going to usurp it, but we're going to use the street cred of it being from Tibetan Buddhism, right? Now, is the modern understanding of the word tulpa have anything to do with Tibetan Buddhism? No, it doesn't. But we've usurped its credibility by saying, look, here's this ancient understanding, and see how it's connected. It's like, yeah, but you're hijacking it. You're making it into something that's not. That is very much what we see when we talk about the Star of Bethlehem, right? Again, the idea that Mary was a victim of an abduction by aliens. That's, again, going back to you're trying to make it say something, right? It, in the same way of Esau somehow being a Bigfoot, or Bigfoot being the descendant of Esau, is trying to read something into the text. It's the same thing, because you then have to say that Ezekiel was a UFO and Sinai was a UFO. It is simply an assumption created to continue this narrative of ancient astronaut interactions in our world. And as for the Star of Bethlehem, the problem is we misunderstand and misread what's happening, because the people who were actually writing the New Testament, they weren't astrologers. They didn't think like an astrologer. They weren't trying to convey astronomical information. I really, really recommend, you can actually go look up starofbethlehem.com, I think is what it is. I want to say his last name's Larson. Again, I'm terrible with names. I worked all of my research into the Revelation 12 alignment is based on his work, and it was really interesting work that he did. What he pointed out is what we're seeing is what is being described is a series of astronomical alignments that the first occurs on the Feast of Trumpets. Again, we have to remember that the Jewish feast days occur on a calendar that's very connected to astronomical alignments and understandings. It isn't as arbitrary as our calendar is, right? And so for him, one of the things he describes is a series of conjunctions between Jupiter and Leo on the feast day of the Feast of Trumpets, and that it looks very much. Now you need to either have a very high sophistication of understanding of astronomy to even understand sort of, or to see it play out. But in Revelation 12, there's this story, right, of the woman who's clothed in the sun, the moon's at her feet. Well, that actually does play out to a point in 2 BC. And 9 months later, we see Jupiter go to Venus. Jesus is born. The Magi are literally, they are the wise men from the East. This is literally the Magi of Daniel 500 years later. We have to remember that Daniel, by the time Daniel has passed away, essentially all of his opponents were gone. They had been wiped out by trying to kill him. They got themselves killed. So Daniel lives, and it has influence on the astrologers of the Magi of Babylon and then Persia, Medio-Persia. And so his writings, his teachings, they have all of those, even after, because again, even when Cyrus the Great releases the Hebrews to go back, not all of them do. And the Magi certainly didn't. They still had all his writings. He would have been a highly respected person. So they had all of his writings, all of his calculations. And so they were looking for something. They were looking for astronomical events, to Horace's point. And so the Star of Bethlehem is a series of astronomical alignments and conjunctions that that they understood because they were looking for them. Now, the problem is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, they were not astrologers. They were not astronomers. They didn't understand this. They just know, oh, okay, they were following this. They were using very broad language because it's not something they understood what they were talking about. And we see this actually and this kind of ties into the idea of even idols in the Old Testament. It's very clear from the way the prophets speak about idols that they didn't really understand what the neighboring nations were doing, or more specifically, they had a very different understanding of what they were doing, rather than what, if you had asked one of the Philistines or one of the Egyptians, what are you doing with this idol? They would have explained it very, very differently. So a lot of these connections to things like astrology, or the Hebrews just didn't understand it because again, their entire culture was created to avoid those understandings, but God still used it. And so it's not that they was, oh, here's this, we sort of envision it, and this is on Christians as well. We haven't done a really good job of explaining it because we don't understand it half the time. We've abandoned a lot of these understandings, a lot of these fields of thought. So we often do depict it as like a comet or something that's moving in front of them and then hovering over Jesus's house, right? That's just not what happened. What they were describing was a series of conjunctions and alignments that would have meant something to them, but not necessarily to anyone else.
I think that that touches a little bit on something that I think is that so much of whatever supernatural and paranormal reality is, even if we're very well versed in the scriptures and we're very well versed in other religious texts and the history of these things, there's so much that we just don't know. There's so much which in fact is probably ineffable. There's so much that we just can't know. So often I think it's very tempting for us to put some type of interpretation onto anomalous experiences, even when they appear in ancient texts, to try to make sense of them within whatever our framework is, be that as a Christian framework or be that as, an ancient astronaut framework. But some of these things are really difficult to decipher, really difficult to try to get a hold on, to get, an intellectual grasp upon the concept.
Yeah, this is something we're supposed to wrestle with, right? Like Israel can basically be translated as those who wrestle with God, right? Like there's this Jacob, literally he gets the name Israel after literally wrestling with God physically, right? God doesn't want automatons. It's supposed to be something that we are wrestling with. It's not supposed to be just easily understood. And I think one of the reasons for this, and we've talked about this again on this channel, the best way maybe to understand and visualize this is we're dealing with something that's above us dimensionally. Let's bring some modern sci-fi language into it, right? If you have a multi-dimensional being, it's very different it's seeing things differently from us, right? In the same way, if we were to try and communicate with the old 2-bit scroller Mario, right? And you ask him, this is from the Imaginary Axis, by the way, great channel that's about comics, so I don't know how many people would actually care. But he does this really great thing on Thanos in this explanation, not Thanos, Darkseid, but he does use this metaphor, so I'm borrowing from him. But imagine you were having a conversation with Super Mario from the original 2D scroller, right? And you said, Mario, why don't you just run around the pipes and the mushroom guys, the Goombas and the Koopa turtles? Why don't you just run around them? Why are you going over? He would have no way of understanding what you're talking about, right? It would be you might as well have just said to me, why don't you just move septward? Sept meaning 7, ward meaning direction. Well, there is no 7th direction in our universe. But from a higher plane, there would be. In the same way, if I'm talking to Mario can't understand the concept of around. God is communicating through us, or to us, through cultures and experiences in ways that, in very limited text, right? That's the other thing we have to understand. The people who are writing this have to understand enough to actually transmit the information and in very short snippets. The Bible, as thick as it is, ain't really all that thick when you consider what it's trying to tell you, right? Um, so, the same people who complain about the Bible being too long, the same people who've read every Harry Potter book, right? It's like, I'm sorry, you've read twice the length. What the Bible is doing is that God is showing us through very, very poetic language and experiences and encounters. He's trying to tell us about himself and our relationship with him and how we should interact with other humans in ways that we can understand, within frameworks we can comprehend. And he's trying to tell us these things. And the problem is, in the modern world, it's not that we're dumb, that we are, but rather we're very literal. We want to read the Bible like we're reading a newspaper, and it's not. It was never designed to be read like that. It was designed to be read theologically, meaning, oh, hey, Matthew has 14 generations between uh, Adam to Abraham, and then Abraham to David, and David to Jesus. Okay, well, what we miss is the last letter of David's name. The gematria is 14. So it's 14 3 times, which they would have known was connected to David. The original audience is where he's like, oh, he's the new David. That's how that should be understood, but we're missing that, right? We miss a lot of the nuance, a lot of the fact that we're supposed to be comparing, contrasting. Like, we break up stories that are much bigger, and particularly in the New Testament, we're like, well, here's this story, and then here's this story, and then here's the story. It's like, no. We're supposed to see all those stories as one story, and we're supposed to be comparing and contrasting the characters on either side of this one event here, because we want to read it like a newspaper where everything's laid out, all the facts are there, and I don't have to think about it. I just have to receive the information. But God is asking you to wrestle with it. He's asking you to think about this and to ponder this and to explore it, because he's communicating in a much bigger, fuller way to change our lives and how we think about the world around us.
Very, very well said, mate. There's a question here from the Dead End Collective that came in a little bit ago, but you might like to answer it. And it says, well, he asks, so God was and is unseeable and therefore blinding.
Not, I would tend to agree, right? The thing is, the Father, again, Trinitarian theology, right? The Father's never been seen because we can't. The two powers idea of the Old Testament, which becomes the Trinity in the New Testament, with the addition of the Holy Spirit and sort of that understanding, is that the part of God that's ever really been seen is Jesus in his Old Testament appearances, but he's appearing as a different thing every time. He is blinding, but he's also, the world of the supernatural is unseeable to us, and thankfully so. It's a very weird place. But yeah, we couldn't see him. We couldn't comprehend him in his own native form. There has to be a medium for us to comprehend him, because it's too big, it's too powerful. Again, if I'm trying to talk to Super Mario, he couldn't even comprehend what I am, because his world is 2 dimensions. He couldn't possibly comprehend a third dimensional being. You'd have to have an intermediary, something, a different medium by which to communicate to Mario.
Yeah, that's an excellent analogy. There's a question a little bit off topic. Do you want to answer a question about?
When have I ever stayed on topic?
Okay, no. Well, let's throw it then. It's from Woo Riders DG, which might be short for dog. I'm not sure what the DG is, but Woo Riders DG. Question for you, Jason: what is the significance of the first American Pope? Do you think this was intentionally done, and what effect will it have globally, good or bad? It's entirely off topic, but you being the religious scholar you are, I guess I can
I'm a
see
guy who draws
why
comics.
they would like to ask you this question.
You know what? Well, when they called me and asked who the new pope should be, I told them, go made in the USA so you can avoid the tariffs. No, honestly, this is where I tend to be a little Buddhist and say we'll have to wait and see. I legitimately don't know. There's we'll just have to wait and see how things pan out. I mean, I wish I had some sort of greater insight, but what I have discovered in my life is I'm certainly not a prophet, and I can't see the future. So, um, we will have to wait and see what this new pope does. So again, I wish I had an answer. I really do, but anything I would give you would be lying at this point. So I just want to wait and see how it pans out. Um, Again, is it good or bad? We'll have to wait and see how that happens.
Good answer. And I
I
think
like to live in optimism. But reality has beaten that optimism out of me. So I don't know. I'm happy to be like, well, let's be cautiously optimistic. And you know what? My cautious optimism did pay off with Thunderbolts. That was actually the first good Marvel movie, genuinely good Marvel movie in a very long time.
You know, it's funny because I don't watch any of that trash anymore. I loved it when the Marvel Universe started. I was so excited, and then I don't know, didn't they have waves or generations or whatever, like
Yeah.
phases or something? And I don't know. By about third phase, I was just like, this is like going on space. You go to Disneyland, and the only ride you take is Space Mountain for the whole day. Eventually, you want to see other things, right? I don't want to see that, but I'll be honest. I did think that Marvel movie potentially look good, but I have such little faith in the Marvel Cinematic Universe anymore.
I didn't even bother with the new Captain America, but I did see Thunderbolts because I'd heard some good things, and it is legitimate. It's probably one of the top 5, honestly.
I couldn't even finish the Avengers friend. I couldn't even finish the second part of Infinity War. I was so tired by then. It was just tiresome. It was unwatchable to me.
Yeah, the problem with Infinity War and Endgame is, again, it's very easy to get sort of burned out on it. I would say at least watch those because they're good, but it's only because I think the thing that makes them good is that they are the payoff to literally 20-something movies. But in Marvel's, here's the thing. I didn't like Captain Marvel, the first movie they did. I thought it was terrible, but Marvel's, the sequel, if you don't have a lot of expectations as far as things, you just want to go have a good time, it's actually really good. It has one of the best fight scenes in any Marvel movie, too. It has one of the best fight scenes, and I was like, this feels wasted, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun. But Thunderbolts, very good. You don't even have to have a lot of deep connection to the characters to get it. There's no fat on the script. It's very good. And it doesn't have traditionally Marvel movies have a problem with the third act. You have a great movie, then it kind of blows in the third act. This one does not have a third act problem. Great movie. Loved it. Gosh. And Donnie, we don't care about your opinion on Marvel movies. I saw him in there lurking.
Oh, he was?
He's in there. He's in there.
Sorry, Donnie, if I missed you. He's probably going to pop in and I'm so tired of it. I could rant about it, but I shan't. I think one of the takeaways perhaps from tonight's conversation is that it might be more valuable instead of us living in the modern world. And this is what I've taken away from a lot of what you've said, rather than trying to transpose or telescope our current views on extraterrestrial life and hairy hominids running around the woods and try to project that back to ancient texts, being the Bible and other ones. It might be more worthwhile to try to take those older ideas and see how they're playing out in the phenomenon that we understand, quite possibly mistaken, within a modern space age, modern scientific construction, which is the reality that we live in. It might be worth looking the other way, looking to see what if we looked at those older traditions and brought them forward, could we maybe learn more about all of this anomalous phenomena, which we just can't seem to get an adequate grip on, no matter how long we study it using modern scientific methodology and approaching it from a kind of modern psychological or a modern thinking perception. Maybe we're better served going back to our ancestors who had contact with the numinous and the divine and the other or the supernatural or whatever we want to call it at a far more intimate level, and wondering what those experiences can tell us about our confusion with dealing with anomalous phenomena today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the great hubrises of the modern world is believing that we understand anything. I've been listening again. I'm a guy who draws comics, but so physics, not really my strong suit per se, right? I'm practical physics, I'm a little bit more okay with, but there's a huge conversation that's not really happening in the public sphere about why the string theory itself is dying. That people are like, hey, this is not yielding anything that we thought it would. And when you think about all of these, essentially, let me piss off a bunch of people. Science is as much folklore as anything else. And what I mean by that is we understand folklore is to mean something made up by a culture, and that's not what folklore is. It is a way of understanding and living by a people. The way we do science is as much folklore as it is anything else. And the problem is we are still trying to grasp with concepts and ideas that we don't really understand. It's still trying to grasp at the unknowable. The problem is when we are dealing with things that are just interacting with us in a very different way, we have this overly materialized concept and view of the universe. And it's clearly just adapting. This phenomenon is adapting itself to communicate with us in a way that we're familiar with. Well, that also means it's not what we think it is now. It may not necessarily have been what it was. So again, the Shahadim are probably not actually goat creatures, right? In so much as they are also probably not little gray guys with big eyes. But that's how they're interacting with us. And and I think the scary thing is if we allow our hubris to believe that we understand more than the people who lived 3,000 years ago about how this thing interacts, not necessarily about how the world looks or the shape of the earth or how, the fact that we can separate our physical and theological cosmologies, that may not give us any advantage over the ancients when we're dealing with the supernatural, a world that is so far different from us that we may be on the same footing. In fact, we may be on worse footing because we think we're smart enough to figure it out. And it's very, very dangerous.
No, I agree. And everybody who listens regularly, as you do, knows my lack of any faith in science. And because I'm a Fordian, so I agree
Yeah.
with Fort's famous quote that every science is a mutilated octopus. If its tentacles were not clipped to its stumps, it would feel its way into disturbing contacts. And I think that there are all kinds of disturbing truths out there, and science doesn't want to know them. And incidentally, most people don't want to know them.
Very true. I almost spit out my drink. You wait till I took a drink to drop that one.
There you go.
No, I think you're completely correct. In that, and this is where I'm slightly more optimistic than you. I think science can say, hey, there's a thing here, but it can't really understand the thing because the thing itself, you can't poke it with a stick, right? There's no poking a shahadim with a stick. But you could say, hey, there's a thing here. The problem is most of the scientific community as it is currently allowed to persist and is funded. That's a very different thing from saying how it actually works. From how it's currently funded, doesn't even take these things into consideration. It doesn't want to. And Donnie's gonna pimp the Church of Dogman now. Back, Donnie. That's on your show. So yeah, this is where you and I separate but only in a little bit. Is that I think there is a place for science to say, hey, there's a phenomena here. The problem is beyond that statement, we don't have the psychological, well, probably that too, but the scientific ability to truly observe it in a way that would allow it to be known, to be understood through science, which means we need to understand that there's a different way of looking at all this. And this is where the ancient wisdoms and revelation does, and I mean that as theological revelation, not the book of Revelation, where that plays in. And we need to be willing to be open to say, hey, maybe these stupid phones and EMF readers and all that may not actually get us one step closer to understanding that phenomena, but rather saying, hey, maybe we need to take a step back and see what these people were saying and take it seriously. Maybe not literally, but definitely seriously.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think technology, for all of its apparent surface blessings, is ultimately an incredible curse which disconnects us more and more from any deeper reality, be it a physical or a spiritual reality, that we're all living in compartmentalized cubicles, even if we aren't seeming to be sitting in them at a job, which many of us are, but even those who aren't,
Mhm.
compartmentalize ourselves almost intentionally by plugging into a constant flow of self-gratifying algorithm-driven media, which makes us have nothing to do with each other and nothing to do with any deeper reality,
Yeah.
let alone a spiritual or meaningful reality. But Jason, it's a great joy to have you, as it always is. But people should continue to, even though you're not on the network regularly enough, we should still have a show together. But that's another story. Let people know how they can just stay on top of what you're doing, keep in contact with you, and see what you're up to.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'm on Facebook. And again, seerpapers.com, finally operational, has links to my Rumble and YouTube channels and my channel on X, and a link to my authors page. So as these new comics come out, you can purchase them. You can go back and look at my work on the Revelation 12 alignment, or any of the other things I've done.
Had a quick question from Diana Fowler. What's your Facebook page? Can you share it with people? How do they find you on Facebook?
Yeah, it's just Jason McLean. There's an artist, Jason McLean, and my lovely visage has been drawn. But yeah, just you can look me up, Jason McLean. And if you are following Dean on Facebook, and why wouldn't you? We link to each other all the time. But yeah, worst case scenario, serialpapers.com, links to all my stuff except my Facebook channel. All right. Thank you, Diane. I will add a Facebook link here in a little bit. Well, probably this weekend. But yeah, find me on Facebook, Jason McLean. I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, that's a good idea to have that there as well. It's funny how people tend to drift towards their preferred social media platforms. To be honest, mine is Facebook. I don't use anything else. I think my festivals have Twitter pages, but that's about it. I don't know how people keep up with having like 3 or 4 or 5 or I don't know how many there even
I
are.
can't.
My
Yeah.
gosh. Like I said, it's a curse, but man, what wasn't a curse, what was an absolute blessing was to talk to you tonight, Jason. Thank you so much for visiting with me tonight.
Always a pleasure.
And man, until I talk to you again, Jason, which maybe might even be in a few minutes in the post-show brief wrap-up that you and I will do, and until I talk to everybody else out there, which will be next Tuesday, the same weird time, same weird channel, please keep it weird.